So this morning, as we get started, we are looking forward to a new year, and I realize that many of you are still celebrating Christmas today, and even our family will celebrate some in the week to come. But as we get ready to start a new year, we wanted to ask 7 questions for the end of the year. These are 7 questions that we can look back on, create some goals for next year based off of how this year went. And before we get into those, I wanted to remind us of how to set goals, okay? Just to have a brief reminder. So as as we're working through these 7 questions, I want you to have either a note out in your phone that maybe you can pin at the top, and or a piece of paper that you can write some of these thoughts that you have as we work through these questions. You'll see what I'm talking about as we get to them. But to make this usable and something that we can actually use, there are some rules for goal setting. There's a method called SMART goals, okay? SMART's the acronym. And I want us to think about specific. Is my goal specific? I want to be a better Christian. Sounds like a great goal, okay? I almost said I want to be a Christian is not a great goal. That's a great goal. How am I going to do that is the better goal. I want to get specific. I want to dedicate this amount of time, or I want to set this new standard in my life, or I want to take on this new discipline. That's the goal. Not a broad goal, but a specific goal. SMART goals are measurable, meaning that I can see them. I can put it on paper. I can tell if I'm moving forward or backwards away from that goal. They're achievable. There's a lot of things in life that I want to be that I simply never will be. I'm not going to be a bodybuilder by profession. It's just not going to happen. I don't have it within me to go to the gym that often. Our SMART goals need to be relevant, meaning they need to be realistic, they need to be reasonable, they need to be results-based. But then also our goals need to be time-bound, meaning that I'm going to put a time limit on it, or this is how much I'm going to spend on this goal, or this is what this is worth in time to me. So they need to be time-bound. So let's get to some questions. The first question that I want us to ask ourselves about this year in order to make goals for next year is, what did I do to improve my family this year? What did I do to improve my family this year? As I look back on 2021, is my family better off because of the actions or inactions that I took? Is my family improved this year? And so sometimes we make resolutions that focus on ourselves. We make resolutions that focus on our careers, our bottom lines. But let's think about our families for just a minute. Ephesians 5:22 through chapter 6, verse 4, Paul deals a lot with the family in this section. It's not a feel-good section of Scripture. It's a section that talks about how we are to deal with one another in submission, how wives are to respect and be in submission to their husbands, and how the husbands are supposed to love their wives just as the church is loved by Christ and is willing to do anything and everything for her, how children are to be obedient to parents for a just reason. And I think what Paul is saying here is not to lord something over somebody else. But instead, when we think about our families and the goals we want to set for them, his instructions talk about how we are to value the others over self. And that's a difficult concept because most of us are taught through the world around us that I am the most important thing in this world. Paul says to get out of that mindset, to get out of that thinking, and instead focus on the others around you. Just as if Christ thought you more important than himself. Think about your spouse in that way. Think about your parents in that way. Think about your children in that way. What can I do? How can I help improve my family? What acts of selflessness instead of selfishness can I put into a goal today? Maybe it's getting home earlier from work if you control that. Maybe it's I'm going to get up a little earlier to spend time with my family in a productive way. Maybe it's having family devotionals or reading through the Bible together. Maybe it's choosing ways to be less critical. Instead of being less critical, I'm going to be more encouraging, and we're going to talk about that more in just a minute. Maybe I'm going to plan meals at home instead of being scattered about. Maybe I'm going to focus on encouraging. Maybe I'm going to cut out some things that get in the way of my time with my family. Maybe I'm going to cut out some time on the TV or with the phones or on social media. And when I'm at home and I'm away from school or work, I'm going to be at home. Maybe this is the year that if your marriage needs help, you're going to seek out help for your marriage. In what ways did I improve my family this year? And how can I better improve it next year? What goals am I willing to set out? There's a book called The Revolutionary Parent. And in that book, he talks about being purposeful with our parenting, being purposeful with our lives. And I get that a lot of times we parent and we live our lives just based off of necessity. We're in the heat of the moment. Life is going at 90 miles an hour. And so we just parent the best way that we can. But there's a better way of parenting, and I would say even being married on purpose. Putting purpose behind what we do should be one of our goals. So the goals for you is how do you attain that in your life? Question number 2. Did I grow? No, not yet. Michael's in a hurry today. He must be hungry. I didn't eat breakfast either. Question number 2, did I grow in my faith this year? James 4:8 talks about draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Well, how do I draw near to God? Do I feel closer to God this year? Am I closer to God this year than I was last year? How do I get closer to God in 2022? The spiritual disciplines are designed to help us grow closer to God, but not just to grow closer to God, to learn to trust Him more. So, for instance, when I pray, it's not just about talking to God. It's about, we actually talked about this last week, putting my burdens, putting my worries on God. Because who is in control of the world around us? Who has control? It's not me. It's God. So when I pray and when I set goals and have a practice of prayer, those times of worry seem to decrease. When I fast, I'm not just doing it to beat my body up and to skip a meal or to, like the Pharisees, to show off how much I can fast. Instead, when we fast, we learn what weaknesses we have, because I don't know about you, but when I'm hungry, that's when my true character comes out. And when I'm hungry, you're going to see all of my impatience. And when I'm hungry, you're going to see all of my anger and my attitude. Maybe you're the same way. Maybe we should start sending donuts out up front to help with that. But if you think about it, when you fast, you learn to rely on God for what you need, right? That was the purpose. When I meditate, I put His word on my heart so that when a temptation arises, I already have that word in my heart. When I memorize Scripture, those are things that are already in my heart, that when I'm tempted, I'm able to draw on what I already have and not try to make it up as I go. Those disciplines help to anchor us to God, which in turn really allows us to be more confident in our faith. It helps us to be more dynamic with our faith and to adjust to the changes in life. We know that life is going to throw curveballs, right? Life is going to be hard. Life is going to change. It's going to change drastically and in unexpected ways. Probably the only thing that you can count on is that things are going to be different. And how I handle those changes, I think, is squarely related to how disciplined I am in the things that God has said to be disciplined in. So how did I grow in my faith this year? And in 2022, what ways will I put into practice of how to grow and be closer to God? Question number 3. What was my biggest time waster? What can I do about it? And if you're looking back on 2021, we probably don't have to go too far to think about what we spent most of our time on. It's going to be what's the most predominant in our life, right? I don't know about you, but on my phone on Sundays, unfortunately it's on Sundays, probably fortunately, because I get this little reminder that tells me how much time I used on my phone. Do y'all get those? Maybe you should disable them if you don't want to be discouraged by how much time you spend on your phone. And this is not a sermon about phone use, but every Sunday I get a message that pops up that says, you spent this much time on social media. You spent this much time on the weather app. You spent this much. It's a wake-up call, right? What were your biggest time wasters? Meaning they weren't productive. Meaning they weren't full of value. They weren't full of things that help you accomplish the goals that you want to set. And what can you do about it? Ephesians 5. Look carefully then how you walk, not as wise but unwise. Not as unwise but as wise. Making the best use of the time because the days are evil. Therefore do not be foolish but understand what the will of the Lord is. Paul basically says, don't be ignorant with your time. You've got a goal. Is the time that you're allotted. We've talked a lot about time here. We talked about it on a couple weeks ago with our children and Fruit of the Womb Day. You've got so much time with your kids. You've got so much time with your spouse. You've got so much time with your church to prepare for the things that are going to happen. Did I use my time in the best way possible? Not ignorantly, not unwise, but wisely. So maybe it's time to cut down some of the phone usage. Maybe it's time to cut down on some of the things that don't matter. Some of the time on our media, on the TV. To spend more time with the people who do really matter. Question number 4. Did I break any bad habits? And maybe the better question is, did I establish any good ones? One thing that I have found when trying to break bad habits is that they usually don't go very far until I establish a new one to take its place. We've got to do something with our time. We've got to do something that fills that void that bad habit was filling. We do have habits out of necessity. We do things and we have bad habits because our mind tells us that we need it for a purpose. And if you think about the things that you do that you would consider a bad habit, you do them for a reason. They're not always godly reasons, but you do them for a reason. So in order to take that unhealthy or bad habit, I think you've got to exchange it and replace it with something new, healthier, and more spiritual. So what are those habits going to be? What are the bad ones that I broke? What are the good ones that I need to establish or have established this year? One of the things that we learn about Jesus is he had habits. Jesus went out often. In Luke 5, we see that he goes out often to find a deserted place, to be alone, to spend time with God. In Luke 22, verse 39, it tells us that as was his custom, he went in for a time of prayer. He made it a habit to do those things. And because he knew that those habits would lead him to be what God intended him to be. We talked about the spiritual disciplines earlier. One of the things we've worked through in a couple classes that I've been in with the disciplines is that we always want to answer the question, what would Jesus do in a situation? And the truth is that's probably a dangerous question because what Jesus would do is probably not the right question to ask. Is what did he do? So we want to be like Jesus in these big areas of our life, meaning when huge events happen, we want to figure out what would Jesus do in this situation. But really the question we need to ask is, what did he do to prepare himself for those moments? Because we can't act like Jesus in just the big moments if we haven't prepared and we haven't done the things that he did in order to act that way. Christ had a certain relationship with the Father before he goes into the wilderness. Christ has a relationship with the Father, and he prepared to go to the cross. He did a lot of things so that he could act selflessly. He did a lot of things to become a sacrifice. He did a lot of things so that we could ask the question, what would he do? So we need to figure out what are some of those habits, what are some of those things that we need to do. So did I break any bad habits? Did I establish any new ones? Maybe you need to establish a habit of reading through Scripture, praying for an extended period of time, creating a prayer journal, or having devotionals with your family. Maybe it's time to be intentional in the play with your kids, the conversations that you want to focus on, the conversations you want to have. Maybe it's a need to get organized so that you can actually attain and have the time to make these things that you want to do fit better with your life. Question number 5. What's my biggest regret of 2021? And what am I going to do with it? Paul says in 2 Corinthians 7:10 that godly grief works towards salvation. He basically says, I know I hurt your feelings, but I really don't care if it made you change. Does that make sense? That's pretty easy. I know I said some things that you didn't want to hear, and I know that your ego is bruised, and I know that that's not the easiest thing to hear. Maybe you're sorrowful for what you've done, and that's okay. And as I look back over 2021, do I have regrets? If you do, that's okay. The question is, what am I going to do about it? What am I going to do to change it? How will 2022 be different than 2021 was? Based off of that question, what was my biggest regret? So maybe you regret a decision or a choice, or doing something or not doing something that you should have done. Maybe you regret the words that you said or the things you didn't say. What was those regrets? What goal would you like to set in order for it to be different in 2022? Question number 6. Y'all should like these 7 question things because you know when we're getting to the end, right? Question number 6. Who is better off because of my influence? Who is better off because of my influence? We don't have to look far before we start seeing the hurt in people's faces. We don't have to look far to figure out who it is that needs encouragement, that needs you to be a positive influence in their life. Maybe you have someone in mind right now that needs encouragement or that needs an influence. And I think that the church is designed for 2 purposes. I think those 2 purposes are very general. But I think the church has a purpose of radiating God's goodness to the world who doesn't know God. That was Israel's purpose. Israel's purpose was to not just be God's people, but to instead be God's people that showed the rest of the world, the pagan nations, what it was, that their God, that Yahweh was capable of, how good Yahweh was. That was Israel's purpose. That's our purpose, to be salt and light. And I think his other purpose is that for those that are in the church, the house of God, to build each other up into what God's design for us is to be. That's what 1 Thessalonians 5:11 is all about. Encouraging one another and building up one another. So I want you to think about your circle of influence. Those that are around you, those that you spend a lot of time with, those at your job place, those at those that are sitting around you in church, those that you'll eat lunch with later, those that are in your small groups, those that are a part of your life. Who is better off because you were a part of their life? Who is better off because of the influence that you had on them? So think about those that you're around and whether or not you are building up or tearing down. The choice is ours, and I think it needs to be an intentional one. So are we using words to add life to somebody? Are we using our words, a better use of our time and our energy so that others are benefited by knowing us? Am I a positive influence, or am I a drain on those around me? Who's better off because of my influence? I want to encourage you to think about some very practical ways. It's so simple to be an encourager. How can you use social media to encourage somebody else? Who can I send a message to? What's a comment that I can make that's going to build them up? Where's a card or a letter that I can send? What's a phone call? I think it's wonderful that our elders are taking a list of everyone that is associated with Main Street. He wants to call you for the simple purpose of we want to encourage you and encourage you in your faith. It's not the naughty list, as Wayne said. Everybody's on this list. It's the list because you are associated here. We want to encourage you. And our elders want to build you up. How can I do that for those that are around me? I think it's pretty simple. Think about the words that you use and how they impact others. James talked a lot about that in the power of the tongue. So question number 7. What did I do this year that will matter most in 5 or 10 years? What will I do next year that will matter the most in 5 to 10 years? What will I do now that matters the most for eternity? We're all working for something. The question is whether what we're working for really matters. Lots of things matter, but there's very few things that really, really matter. What are you working for that will matter in the next 5 to 10 years? Matthew 6, 20 through 21, Jim Ballou read for us a minute ago. Lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. I mean, what am I doing here that's paying off for me and for others for eternity? Not focusing on the things that are temporal, that moths and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal. We focus on a lot of things that at the end of the day can be taken away in a heartbeat. There's some things that we can do that can never be taken away. The impact that we have, the legacy that we leave, the ways in which we pour into others that will influence them for the better. What will I do that will matter the most in 5 to 10 years? What will I do the most that will matter for eternity? What will matter in eternity is if we gave our lives to Christ. Did I follow in His will for my life? Did I seek His ways? Did He show up in my life? Did what I do show Christ to the world around me? So we've got 7 questions. And as we think about these 7 questions, I want us to evaluate our lives, to think about what it is that 2022 needs to do differently. It's not designed to be a downer of a sermon. This is not designed to make you feel awful about yourself. This is hopefully a motivation to leave here and do something different because of the new goals that you want to set. Proverbs 21, verse 5 says, "The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance, but everyone who is hasty comes only to poverty." I want us to be diligent. I want us to be smart about our goals. I want us to plan and to think through what it is that 2022 needs to look like. Really, we want to live more purposefully. We want to make sure that we are living in a way that leads to abundance. Not abundance financially, but abundance spiritually. But in all things, let's also remember our dependence on the Lord. Focus on Him. And focus on what it is that we need to be doing to live for Him. Maybe this is not a time that you want to come forward. We talked about a lot of personal goals today. I hope that you've written down some goals that you want to consider for the new year, that you've thought through some things that you want to be different. Maybe during this time of invitation song, we can think through those things right where you are. But maybe today's a day that you want to put Christ on in baptism. Maybe today's a day that you want to start a new life with a new hope and a new meaning. It's a great day to do that. We want to stand as we sing this song of invitation. If anyone has need, would you come now as we stand and sing?